When you look at a map of Asia, your gaze is likely drawn to a vast country sandwiched between two giants, Russia and China. This is Mongolia, a country of over 1.5 million square kilometers, approximately 600,000 square miles, where just 3.5 million people live on the vast steppe. Here, amidst endless pastures and rugged mountains, time seems to slow down. Modern Mongolia is a stunning blend of ancient traditions and rapid modernization. In the capital Ulaanbaatar, skyscrapers stand side by side with traditional yurts, and nomadic herders use satellite communications to manage their herds. The country is rich in minerals, copper, gold, coal, and rare earth metals, making it a major player in the global raw materials market. But few know that this seemingly quiet country was once the center of the greatest empire in human history. An empire that stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, from the Siberian taiga to the jungles of Vietnam. An empire that changed the course of world history and left an indelible mark on the cultures of dozens of peoples. How did a small group of nomadic tribes conquer half the then-known world? What happened on the Mongolian steppes after the fall of the great empire? And how did an ancient warrior people preserve their identity, surviving centuries of Chinese domination and Soviet influence? This is the story of Mongolia, the origins of civilization. Long before the name Genghis Khan struck fear into rulers from Beijing to Baghdad, the Mongolian steppes were home to numerous nomadic peoples. Archaeological finds indicate that the first humans appeared in the territory of modern Mongolia over 700,000 years ago. However, the true history of these lands begins with the emergence of the first organized nomadic communities. In the 3rd millennium BC, tribes emerged in the Mongolian steppes who mastered horse breeding and developed a unique nomadic culture. They learned to make felt, build portable dwellings called yurts, and, most importantly, made the horse the foundation of their civilization. Horses provided them with milk, meat, leather for clothing, and transportation for traveling across the vast expanses. By the 1st millennium BC, the first major tribal alliances had formed in Mongolia. The Scythians, Xiongnu, and Xianbei, these peoples created powerful states that competed equally with the great empires of antiquity. Particularly noteworthy is the Xiongnu Empire, which existed from the 3rd century BC to the 2nd century AD, and was the first attempt to unite the steppe peoples under a single authority. The Xiongnu created a complex military-political organization based on the decimal system. Their armies were divided into tumens, units of 10,000 warriors, which were further subdivided into thousands, hundreds, and tens. This system would later be adopted by the Mongols and would become the foundation of their military might. Chinese chronicles of the time described Xiongnu raids with horror. "They appear like the wind and disappear like smoke," wrote one Chinese historian. It was to defend against the Xiongnu that the Chinese began building the Great Wall of China, transforming it from separate fortifications into a unified defensive system. The birth of an empire. By the 12th century, the Mongolian steppes were a mosaic of warring tribes: Merkits, Tatars, Naimans, Karaits, and Kongrats, each tribe vying for dominance, but none could achieve a decisive advantage. It seemed the steppe was doomed to perpetual civil strife. It was at this time, between 1155 and 1162, that a boy named Temujin was born into the family of a minor tribal chieftain, Yesuge Batir. According to Mongolian belief, he was born with a blood clot in his fist, a sign of a great warrior's destiny. Temujin's childhood was full of hardships. When he was 9, his father was poisoned by the Tatars. Yesuge's family was exiled from the tribe, and Temujin, his mother, and his younger brothers found themselves on the brink of survival in the harsh steppes. This period taught the future conqueror of the world cruelty, cunning, and the ability to find allies in the most hopeless situations. Slowly, step by step, Temujin began to gather supporters around him. He formed an alliance with Jamuka, his childhood friend, and later with the powerful Wang Khan, ruler of the Karyids. But Temujin was more than just a successful military leader. He was a visionary who saw the future of the Mongol tribes in their unity. Unlike traditional steppe leaders, Temujin didn't limit himself to family ties when forming his army. He accepted all capable warriors into his ranks, regardless of their origin, and promoted them not by nobility, but by talent and loyalty. This meritocratic system became one of the foundations of the future power of the Mongol Empire. The path to power was long and bloody. Temujin had to battle his former friend Jamuka, betray his patron Wang Khan, and defeat the powerful nomads. But each victory brought him new supporters, and each defeat only strengthened his resolve. In 1206, a great Kurultai, a congress of all Mongol tribes, convened on the banks of the Onon River. Here, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal Khan of the Mongols. For the first time in their history, the disparate tribes united under a single authority: conquest of the world. The unification of the Mongol tribes was only the first step in Genghis Khan's grand plan. The great Khan understood that to maintain unity, the Mongols needed a common goal, a common enemy, and a common prize. And so he directed his warriors' gaze beyond their native steppes. The first victim of the Mongol military machine was the Western Xia state, located in what is now northwestern China. The Tanguts who ruled the state were experienced warriors, but they were unprepared for the Mongol tactics. Lightning-fast cavalry attacks, feint retreats, encirclement, and the destruction of the enemy piecemeal. All of this was new to sedentary peoples. But the real test for the Mongols came in the war with the Jing dynasty, ruled by the Jurchens, a people related to the Manchus. The Jing dynasty was a powerful state with a population of millions, a developed economy, and a strong army. Its capital, Beijing, was protected by mighty walls and considered impregnable. Genghis Khan demonstrated not only military talent, but also strategic thinking on a national scale. Realizing that the Mongols were incapable of taking fortresses, he recruited Chinese engineers, who taught his warriors siegecraft. The Mongol armies mastered the use of catapults, siege towers, and mines. In 1215, Beijing fell. The wealth of the ancient capital flowed into the Mongol treasury, and thousands of artisans were resettled in Mongolia, bringing with them the secrets of Chinese technology. The Jing dynasty was crushed, and the Mongols tasted victory over a great civilization for the first time. Success in China opened new horizons for Genghis Khan. To the west lay the wealthy state of Khwarezm, which controlled trade routes between east and west. The Khwarezm Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad ruled lands from the Caspian Sea to the Indian Ocean, from Iran to Afghanistan. At first, Genghis Khan sought peaceful trade relations with Khwarezm. He sent a trade caravan laden with rich gifts, but the governor of the border town of Otrar, suspected of espionage, ordered the massacre of all the merchants and the seizure of their goods. When Genghis Khan demanded the extradition of the culprit, the Khwarezm Shah not only refused, but also executed the Mongol envoys. It was a declaration of war. In 1219, 200,000 Mongol warriors descended on Khwarezm. What happened next shocked the entire Muslim world. The great cities of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Merv were wiped off the face of the earth. The populations of entire regions were exterminated or enslaved. The Mongol scorched earth tactic had not only military, but also psychological significance. The terror that spread ahead of the Mongol armies forced many cities to surrender without a fight. If you haven't met the Mongols, eyewitnesses said, then your time has not yet come. Genghis Khan himself did not live to see the conquest of Khorasan completed. The great conqueror died in 1227 during a campaign against the Western Shah, which had dared to rebel against Mongol rule. According to legend, before his death, he bequeathed to his sons the task of conquering the entire world. The rise of the empire. The death of Genghis Khan did not halt Mongol expansion. On the contrary, under his successors, the empire reached its greatest extent, becoming the largest continental state in human history. Genghis Khan's third son, Ögedei, became the Great Khan. He proved not only a capable military leader, but also a wise administrator. Realizing that ruling a vast empire by force of arms alone was impossible, Ögedei began to create a state system that combined nomadic traditions with the experience of conquered civilizations. Under Ögedei, the war with the Jin Empire ended. The last Jin emperor committed suicide, and all of northern China came under Mongol control. Simultaneously, Mongol armies under the command of Batu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, descended on Europe. The Russian principalities were the first to experience the might of Mongol arms. Ryazan fell in 1237, Moscow and Vladimir in 1238, and Kiev in 1240. Ancient Russian chronicles described these events with horror, and there was not a single house standing in Kiev. Everything was burned and destroyed. But the Mongols didn't stop at Rus. Their armies crossed the Carpathian Mountains and invaded Poland and Hungary. At the Battle of Legnica, the Polish army led by Duke Henry the Pious was completely annihilated. At the Battle of Mohi, the Hungarian army of King Bela IV suffered a similar fate. All of Central Europe lay open to the Mongol cavalry. Mongol scouts reached the Adriatic Sea, and advance units appeared at the walls of Vienna. European chroniclers of the time wrote of the end of the world and the second coming of the Antichrist. The invasion suddenly ended. The death of the great Khan, Ögedei, in 1241 was the cause. Batu Khan was forced to return to Karakorum for the election of a new ruler. Europe was saved, but the eastern half of the continent fell under Mongol rule for centuries. The new great Khan was Mongke, Genghis Khan's grandson. Under his rule, the empire reached the peak of its power. Mongol armies completed their conquest of China, capturing the Song Empire in the south. Another army, under Hulagu, Mongke's brother, conquered Baghdad and brought an end to the Arab Caliphate. The fall of Baghdad in 1258 was a turning point in the history of the Muslim world. The House of Wisdom, the greatest library of the medieval world, was destroyed, and the last Abbasid caliph was killed. Contemporaries wrote that the waters of the Tigris turned black with the ink of destroyed manuscripts and red with the blood of the slain. Organization of the empire. Ruling the greatest empire in history required the creation of a unique administrative system. The Mongols, being a relatively small people, could not rule the conquered territories by force alone. They had to create a complex system that combined steppe traditions with the experience of sedentary civilizations. The foundation of Mongolian statehood was the Yasa, a code of laws established by Genghis Khan. The Yasa established the principles of religious tolerance, protection of trade, postal service, and state discipline. Anyone who violated the laws of the Yasa was subject to severe punishment, regardless of origin or social status. The Mongols created a unique system of religious tolerance. Unlike most medieval empires, where the state religion was imposed on all subjects, Mongol rulers allowed conquered peoples to preserve their own beliefs. Moreover, they actively patronized all religions, seeking to secure the support of the clergy. At the court of the great Khan in Karakorum, one could encounter Christian priests, Buddhist monks, Muslim ulema, and Taoist sages. All enjoyed the patronage of the Mongol rulers and participated in religious debates held for the Khan's amusement. The Mongols placed particular emphasis on developing trade. Under Mongol rule, the Silk Road experienced a golden age. Protected by Mongolian passports, traders could travel safely from Beijing to Venice. It was during this time that the Venetian merchant Marco Polo made his famous voyage to China. The Yam Postal Service became one of the greatest achievements of the Mongol administration. A system of post stations located a day's march apart allowed messages to be transmitted from one end of the empire to the other in a matter of weeks. Messengers carrying imperial decrees had priority on all roads within the empire. The Mongols also created an effective tax system. They retained traditional tax collection methods in conquered countries, but standardized them and placed them under strict control. Special officials ensured that taxes were collected fairly and deposited into the imperial treasury. Kublai Khan and the Chinese Yuan dynasty. After the death of the great Khan Mongol in 1259, a power struggle erupted between his brothers. Kublai Khan emerged victorious, becoming the last sole ruler of the Mongol Empire. But his reign marked the beginning of a qualitatively new stage in the history of the Mongol state. Kublai was completely unlike his predecessors. While the first Mongol Khans remained steppe dwellers in spirit and way of life, Kublai was raised from childhood by Chinese teachers and deeply imbued with Confucian culture. He saw himself not only as a Mongol Khan, but also as a Chinese emperor. In 1271, Kublai Khan proclaimed the Yuan dynasty and moved the capital from Karakoram to Khanbalik, today's Beijing. This decision symbolized the Mongol state's final shift from nomadic steppe traditions to a sedentary Chinese civilization. Under Kublai Khan, the conquest of China was completed. After a lengthy siege, the last stronghold of the Song Empire fell on March 19th, 1279, when the final naval battle at Yaishan completely ended Song resistance. For the first time in its history, all of China came under the rule of a foreign dynasty. The Mongols came to rule a country with a population of over 100 million. The Yuan dynasty was a time of cultural synthesis. Mongol rulers patronized Chinese literature, art, and science, but simultaneously introduced elements of steppe traditions into Chinese culture. It was during this time that many elements of traditional Chinese opera, incorporating Mongolian musical motifs, emerged. Kublai Khan made several attempts to expand his empire beyond continental Asia. His armies invaded Japan, Java, Vietnam, and Burma. However, these expeditions ended in failure. Particularly disastrous were the attempts to conquer Japan in 1274 and 1281, when the Mongol fleets were destroyed by typhoons, which the Japanese called kamikaze, divine winds. Under Kublai Khan, Mongolian trade flourished. The Silk Road connected China with Europe and the Middle East, bringing enormous revenues to the imperial treasury. Merchants from all over the known world worked in Khanbalik. Marco Polo, who served at Kublai Khan's court, left a detailed description of the wealth and grandeur of the Mongolian capital. However, the Sinicization of the Mongolian elite also had negative consequences. The Mongolian nobility gradually lost the military skills of their ancestors and turned into typical Chinese officials. Ties with the Mongolian steppes weakened, and ordinary Mongols began to perceive the ruling dynasty as an alien force. The collapse of the empire. The vast Mongol Empire could not exist for long as a unified state. Even during Kublai Khan's lifetime, it effectively disintegrated into 4 independent states, uluses, each of which followed its own path of development. The Ulus of Jochi, known in Russian history as the Golden Horde, controlled lands from the Urals to the Danube. Its rulers converted to Islam and created a powerful state that held the Russian principalities in subjection for 2.5 centuries. The Ilkhanate in Iran and Mesopotamia also became a Muslim state, but by the mid-14th century, it had disintegrated into several emirates. The Chagatai Ulus in Central Asia lasted longer than the others,
but it too was eventually absorbed into the state of Timur and his successors.
The Chinese Yuan dynasty lasted the longest, but it too gradually lost its power. The Mongol rulers of China became increasingly cynicized and lost the warlike spirit of their ancestors. At the same time, discontent with foreign rule grew among the Chinese population. In the 14th century, China was rocked by a series of popular uprisings. The most powerful of these was the Red Turban Rebellion, led by Zhu Yuanzhang, a peasant-turned-Buddhist monk. In 1368, he captured Khanbalik and proclaimed the establishment of a new Chinese dynasty, the Ming dynasty. The last Mongol emperor, Togun Temur, was forced to flee to his native steppes. Thus ended a century of Mongol rule in China. But this did not mean the end of Mongol statehood. It simply meant that the center of the Mongol world shifted once again from sedentary lands to the nomadic steppes. Return to the steppes. Expulsion from China was a heavy blow to the Mongols, but it did not mark the end of their political history. In their native steppes, they attempted to re-establish a unified state under the rule of the descendants of Genghis Khan. However, this task proved extremely difficult. Over centuries of rule in China, the Mongol nobility had lost many of their traditional steppe skills, and the steppes themselves had changed. Many tribes had gained independence and were unwilling to submit to central authority. In the 15th century, a talented ruler named Dayan Khan emerged among the eastern Mongols. He managed to temporarily unite most of the Mongol tribes and even launch several successful campaigns against China. However, after his death, the Mongol lands once again fragmented into numerous small fiefdoms. At the same time, a new power began to rise from the east, the Manchus. This small people, living in the forests of Manchuria, united under talented leaders in the early 17th century and began expanding southward against China and westward against the Mongols. The Manchu rulers proved to be skilled diplomats. Instead of conquering the Mongol tribes by force, they won them over by offering Mongol nobles high positions in their army and administration. Many Mongol princes preferred to serve the Manchus rather than fight them. In 1644, the Manchus captured Beijing and founded a new Chinese dynasty, the Qing. Mongol tribes who collaborated with the Manchus received privileged status in the new empire, but effectively lost their independence. The last defenders of Mongolian independence were the Western Mongolian tribal union, the Oirats or Dzungars. Under the leadership of talented Khans, they created a powerful state that controlled vast territories from the Volga to Tibet. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Dzungar Khanate was a serious adversary of both the Chinese Qing dynasty and the Russian Empire. The Dzungars carried out devastating raids on Chinese lands, subjugated Tibet, and waged war against the Kazakh Zhuzhas. However, in the mid-18th century, the Dzungars were defeated by the combined forces of the Qing and Russia. In 1757, the last Dzungar Khan was killed, and most of the Dzungar population was exterminated or fled to neighboring countries under the rule of the Manchu dynasty. With the fall of the Dzungar Khanate, virtually all Mongolian lands came under the control of the Manchu Qing dynasty. A new era in the history of the Mongolian people began, an era of colonial subjugation that would last for more than 2.5 centuries. The Manchu rulers pursued a policy of divide and rule against the Mongols. The Mongol lands were divided into numerous small koshuns, administrative units, each governed by a hereditary prince under the supervision of Manchu officials. Princes were forbidden to maintain relations with each other without permission from Beijing. The Qing government strongly encouraged the spread of Tibetan Buddhism among the Mongols. Buddhist monasteries received enormous land grants and tax breaks. By the 19th century, a significant portion of the Mongolian population consisted of lamas, Buddhist monks who, for religious reasons, were not allowed to have children. This policy had far-reaching consequences. the Mongol population began to decline, and its militancy faded. While in the Middle Ages, the Mongols were renowned as invincible warriors, by the 19th century they had become peaceful herders and religious ascetics. At the same time, the Manchu authorities restricted contacts between the Mongols and other peoples. The Mongols were forbidden from farming, trade, and crafts. They were to remain nomadic herders under the strict control of Qing officials. In the 19th century, the situation for the Mongols worsened further due to an influx of Chinese settlers. The Qing government, faced with demographic pressure in the Chinese provinces proper, began encouraging the migration of Chinese peasants to Mongolia. Chinese settlers plowed the steppes, built permanent settlements, and gradually displaced the traditional nomadic economy. Many Mongol princes in need of money sold or leased their lands to Chinese merchants and moneylenders. By the end of the 19th century, a significant portion of the original Mongolian lands had been settled by the Chinese. The Mongols became a national minority in their own homeland. The traditional nomadic way of life was destroyed, and the Mongols themselves found themselves on the brink of extinction as an independent people. National awakening. At the beginning of the 20th century, national sentiment began to awaken among the Mongols. Several factors contributed to this: the crisis of the Manchu Qing dynasty, the influence of Russian and Japanese policies in the region, and the activities of Mongolian intellectuals educated in Tibet and Europe. The Bogd Gagin, Mongolia's highest Buddhist hierarch, played a special role in the Mongolian national movement. The 8th Bogd Gagin, Jebtsun Damba Kutukta, was not only a religious leader, but also led the struggle for political independence. The Chinese Revolution of 1911, which overthrew the Manchu dynasty, presented the Mongols with a long-awaited opportunity. On December 29, 1911, Mongolia's independence was proclaimed in Urga, present-day Ulaanbaatar. The Bogd Gagin was proclaimed the Bogd Khan, the sacred ruler of an independent Mongolia. The new state encompassed Outer Mongolia, the northern part of the historical Mongolian lands, while Inner Mongolia remained under Chinese control. However, Mongolia's independence was not universally recognized. The Chinese Republic, which succeeded the Qing Empire, laid claim to all former Qing territories, including Mongolia. Only Russia's support allowed the young Mongolian state to defend its independence. In 1915, a treaty was signed between Russia, China, and Mongolia, granting Mongolia autonomy under Chinese suzerainty, but effectively placing it within Russia's sphere of influence. This compromise satisfied neither side and contained the seeds of future conflict. Revolutionary upheavals. The First World War and the subsequent revolutions in Russia radically changed the situation in Mongolia. The fall of the Tsarist regime deprived the Mongolian government of its main patron and left the country alone to face Chinese demands. In 1919, Chinese troops occupied Urga and abolished Mongolian autonomy. The Bogd Khan was stripped of his political power and reduced to a figurehead religious leader. It seemed the dream of Mongolian independence was buried forever. But at this time, a new force entered the picture: the white general Roman Ungern von Sternberg. This adventurer and mystic, nicknamed the Mad Baron, saw himself as the restorer of Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire and the traditional Asian monarchy. In February 1921, Ungern's troops stormed Urga and expelled the Chinese garrison. The Bogd Khan was restored to the throne, but de facto power rested with the Mad Baron and his Cossack platoons. Ungern's rule was marked by extreme cruelty. He ordered mass executions of Chinese merchants, Jews, Bolsheviks, and anyone else he suspected of disloyalty. At the same time, the Baron attempted to realize his mystical ideas about the rebirth of Asia under the auspices of a Buddhist theocracy. However, Ungern's days were numbered. In the summer of 1921, the Red Army, allied with Mongolian revolutionaries, invaded Mongolia. In August, Urga was captured, and Ungern himself was captured
and executed. Two young revolutionaries, Sukbatar and Choibalsan, played a key role in Mongolia's liberation. Sukbatar, a former soldier in the Manchu army, became the military leader of the Mongolian Revolution, while Choibalsan, who came from a poor family, headed its political wing. On July 11, 1921, the establishment of an independent Mongolian state was proclaimed in Urga. This date is still celebrated as Revolution Day and Mongolia's main national holiday. Socialist Mongolia. The victory of the revolution in 1921 opened a new page in Mongolia's history. The young state faced a choice between traditional forms of government and revolutionary socialist ideas. Initially, the constitutional monarchy, headed by the Bogd Khan, was retained. The Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party, founded by Sukbatar and Choibalsan, formally recognized his authority, but effectively controlled the government. Sukbatar's death in 1923, at the age of just 30, was a profound loss for the Mongolian Revolution. Officially, he died of illness, but some historians suspect he was poisoned by political opponents. After the death of the Bogd Khan in 1924, Mongolia was proclaimed a People's Republic, the second socialist country in the world after the Soviet Union. The era of socialist construction under the leadership of the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party, MMPRP, began. The early years of socialist development were extremely difficult. Mongolia remained one of the most backward countries in the world, with a nearly 100% illiterate population, a primitive economy based on nomadic herding, and a lack of modern industry. The Soviet Union became Mongolia's main ally and patron. Soviet specialists helped build the first industrial enterprises, schools, and hospitals. Thousands of young Mongolians received education at Soviet universities, and Russian became the country's second official language. In the 1930s, Mongolia experienced a period of Stalinist repression. Choibalsan, who became the country's sole leader, copied Stalin's methods in combating enemies of the people. Thousands of lamas, feudal nobility, intellectuals, and party officials were repressed. The suppression of Buddhist monasteries was particularly brutal. Of the 700 monasteries that existed at the beginning of the century, only a handful remained by the end of the 1930s. Tens of thousands of lamas were executed or sent to camps. Traditional Mongolian culture suffered irreparable losses. The Second World War and its consequences. World War II proved a serious test for the young Mongolian People's Republic. Although the country officially entered the war only in 1945, Mongolian troops had actually been involved in combat operations much earlier. As early as 1939, Mongolian units fought alongside the Red Army against the Japanese in the Khalkhin-Gol River region. These battles served as a dress rehearsal for the future Great War and demonstrated the high fighting qualities of Mongolian warriors. When the Great Patriotic War began, Mongolia became one of the few Soviet allies to provide real assistance in the fight against fascism. The country supplied the Soviet Union with food, raw materials, horses for the cavalry, and warm clothing for the front. The culmination of Mongolia's participation in World War II was the operation against the Kwantung Army in Manchuria. Mongolian tank units participated in the rapid offensive that led to the defeat of the Japanese army and Japan's surrender. After the war, Mongolia embarked on peaceful socialist construction. With Soviet support, the country developed a modern industry, education system, and healthcare system. Illiteracy was completely eradicated, and life expectancy increased several-fold. Particular attention was paid to the development of the mining industry. Deposits of copper, molybdenum, coal, gold, and other minerals were discovered and developed. Mongolia transformed from a backward agrarian country into an agrarian industrial state. In the 1960s and 1970s, Mongolia experienced a period of prosperity. The country achieved significant success in economic and social development. Modern cities were built, the transportation network was developed, and a higher education system was established. However, socialist modernization also had negative consequences. The traditional nomadic way of life was virtually destroyed. Nomads were forced to settle down and unite into collective farms. Many elements of traditional Mongolian culture disappeared. The collapse of socialism and democratic transformations. In the second half of the 1980s, liberalization processes began in Mongolia, as throughout the socialist bloc. The policies of perestroika and glasnost, pursued in the USSR, also found a response in Mongolia. In December 1989, a series of democratic demonstrations demanding political reforms began in Ulaanbaatar. Unlike in Eastern European countries, regime change in Mongolia occurred peacefully, without bloodshed or violence. In March 1990, an extraordinary Congress of the MPRP was held, which decided to renounce its monopoly on power and hold multi-party elections. The party leadership, headed by Jambin Batmunk, voluntarily resigned. The new Constitution of Mongolia was adopted on January 13, 1992. It proclaimed Mongolia a democratic state, governed by the rule of law, with a multi-party system, separation of powers, and guarantees of fundamental rights and freedoms for citizens. The transition to a market economy proved a painful process. The collapse of the previous planned system, without the creation of effective market mechanisms, led to an economic downturn. The country's GDP fell almost in half. Unemployment rose, and living standards deteriorated. The harsh winters of 1999 and 2000 were particularly severe, when extreme cold and snowfalls killed millions of livestock. This disaster, known as the Dzud, threatened the survival of thousands of herding families. However, the economy gradually stabilized. Assistance from international organizations and developed countries played a significant role. Mongolia became a member of key international organizations, the UN, the World Bank, and the IMF. Modern Mongolia. In the 21st century, Mongolia emerged as one of the most dynamically developing countries in Asia. The main driver of this growth was the mineral boom, a sharp increase in demand for Mongolian minerals from China and other Asian countries. The largest project was the development of the Oyu Tolgoi copper and gold deposit in the Gobi Desert. This is one of the largest mining projects in the world, turning Mongolia into a significant player in the global copper market. Economic growth has significantly improved the population's standard of living. Modern shopping malls, hotels, and office buildings have sprung up in Ulaanbaatar. Mongolian youth have gained access to higher education, including at the world's best universities. However, rapid growth has also created new problems. Income inequality has increased between urban and rural areas, and between workers in modern industries and traditional herders. Pollution from mining has become a serious environmental problem. Mongolia has managed to maintain a balance in its relations with its powerful neighbors, Russia and China. The Third Neighbor Policy, aimed at developing relations with the United States, Japan, South Korea, and European countries, has allowed it to avoid overdependence on any one country. Domestically, Mongolia remains a stable democracy, with regular elections and government turnover. Former communists from the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party, MPRP, and democratic parties peacefully alternate in power, demonstrating the maturity of the Mongolian political system. A major trend in modern Mongolia has been the revival of national traditions. After decades of socialist rule, when traditional culture was suppressed, Mongolians are once again turning to the legacy of their ancestors. Buddhist monasteries are being restored, folk crafts are being revived, and interest in traditional music, literature, and art is growing. The Nadam Festival, with its traditional wrestling, archery, and horse racing competitions, has become a symbol of the revived Mongolian identity. At the same time, Mongolia is actively integrating into the global community. Mongolian peacekeepers participate in UN operations. Mongolian students study at the world's best universities, and Mongolian goods find markets around the globe. The history of Mongolia is a remarkable tale of rise and fall. glory and oblivion, and the ability of a people to rise again after the most difficult trials. From the great conquerors of the Middle Ages to modern democratic politicians, the Mongolian people have traveled a path unmatched. The Mongol Empire of the 13th and 14th centuries changed the face of the world. It united East and West, facilitating the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultures. Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, was the forerunner of modern globalization. But the empire's greatness proved short-lived. The Mongols, having created the greatest state of antiquity, failed to maintain it. Perhaps the reason was that the nomadic civilization of the steppes was ill-suited to governing sedentary societies. Centuries of Chinese domination nearly led to the extinction of the Mongolian nation, but the people managed to preserve their identity, their language, and their culture. And when the time came, the Mongols regained their independence and embarked on the path of modern development. The socialist period, despite all its costs, transformed a backward feudal country into a modern state. The Mongols received education, healthcare, and a developed industry. The price was high, the destruction of their traditional way of life. But the results are clear. The peaceful transition to democracy in the early 1990s demonstrated the political maturity of Mongolian society. The country managed to avoid the bloodshed and chaos that accompanied the collapse of socialism in many other countries. Today's Mongolia is a land of opportunity. Abundant natural resources, a young and educated population, and a stable political system all create the foundation for further development. But Mongolia's greatest asset is its people, who over the centuries have proven their ability to survive and thrive in the most challenging conditions. Mongolian history teaches us that no external circumstances can break a people who remember their past and believe in their future. The descendants of the world's great conquerors are building a peaceful and prosperous country today, but the spirit of their ancestors lives on within them. From the vast steppes of Central Asia to the modern skyscrapers of Ulaanbaatar, the Mongolian people's journey continues. And who knows what new pages will be written in the great book of Mongolian history. The history of nations is not simply a sequence of events. It is a living memory that shapes the present and determines the future. Mongolian history is a shining example of how a small nation can leave an indelible mark on global civilization and preserve its uniqueness in today's globalized world. What do you think of this amazing story of the steppe people? What lessons can be learned from the Mongolian experience for understanding modern processes? Share your thoughts in the comments. Give it a like if you found the material interesting, and subscribe to the channel to learn more fascinating stories about the peoples and countries of our world.